Let's continue our study on Galatians. Let's read Galatians chapter 5, verse 9. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough. Now, if you have been around churches and if you have heard something about leaven, you might have heard that leaven represents sin. Even we have heard of the feast of the unleavened bread, where God says to eat only unleavened bread before the Passover. So we say that it is to remain sinless before the Passover, and that's what God was referring to. But when you look closely at these things and we see that leaven is not necessarily about sin. It is about self-reliance, legalism, hypocrisy. Let's have a look. First, let's go to Galatians chapter 5. In Galatians chapter 5, the topic itself is about legalism. After talking about, how the law brings a curse and how the law is legalism and we should rely on the Spirit rather than living in the law. After that, Paul says that a little leaven the whole lump of dough. He's saying that a little bit of legalism, if you bring a little bit of legalism into the church or into your ministry, it leavens the whole lump of dough. Now let's look at other contexts where it's written. We know that in Matthew chapter 16 and Luke chapter 12, Jesus talks about the Pharisees' leaven, right? So he says that don't take the Pharisees' leaven. If there was one thing Jesus was against the Pharisees, that was legalism, hypocrisy, and they were so self-righteous. That was the problem Jesus had with Pharisees. It was not that he caught them in sin or anything like that, but rather their self-reliant attitude was what Jesus had a problem with. And he was saying that don't take the leaven of the Pharisees. In Luke chapter 12, Matthew chapter 16, what Jesus is actually saying is that don't be self-righteous, don't be self-reliant, don't be legalistic. Don't think that you can do this on your own by keeping some rules and laws and traditions and things like that. You need to come to a place where you rely on me. You need to stop being reliant on yourself and need to rely on God. You need to have faith in what God has done and His righteousness rather than your own righteousness. That is what you need to put your trust in. Another context we can find is in 1 Corinthians 5, where Paul talks about a believer who was living a sinful lifestyle. And Paul talks about that in leaven terms. He says leaven. He uses the word leaven there. But if you read in context, I encourage you to go back and read it. If you read in context, it talks about why are you boasting? And he's talking about the attitude towards that sin. It's not necessarily the sin itself, which was the problem. It was the attitude towards the sin. When they found that they had sinned, they were still boasting. You can say that you're holy, blameless, righteous, everything. Are you saying it out of you're self-righteous because you feel that you kept the law perfectly? Or are you saying it out of a reliance towards God, saying that, okay, I am holy, blameless, perfect, righteous because I put my faith in God. And I know if I didn't have faith in God, I wouldn't measure up. Is that how you see things? Because that's what Paul is saying here. Why are you boasting? Because their attitude was not like that. Their attitude was reliant on their own self-righteousness. They felt really good about themselves and was not from a position of by faith I'm righteous, but because they felt that they were superior. That's why Paul mentions leaven there. Leaven is always about legalism. It is about self-reliance, hypocrisy. That is what it is about. So when you go back into the festival of the unleavened bread, now in context, it would make a little bit more sense there. You see that God says they should have only unleavened bread 7 days leading up to the Passover. A lot of people teach that this is about sin, but what God is actually showing is that He's showing the importance of grace here. He's showing the importance of having faith in God. Imagine they are in that house. The blood of the Lamb has been applied at the doors and the Passover is approaching. It is not because of what they did. It is not because of their perfection that they were saved, that they were spared. But rather, it was because of the blood of the lamb. So that's what God was trying to show. So that now they should not have any leavened bread. They should not have any leaven or some sort of a self-righteous attitude towards the Passover. And this shouldn't surprise us because Jesus has been throwing hints about this from the very beginning. When we read about the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee in Luke chapter 18, verse 9 to 14, the Pharisee approached things from a very legalistic perspective. He said, I fast twice a week, I tithe, I do this, I wear this kind of clothes, and I always make sure I pray in public. I'm at the forefront of ministry. But the tax collector, what did he say? He said, I have sinned. I have sinned. Have mercy on me. That is amazing. The Pharisee wasn't lying. The Pharisee, whatever he said was true. He fasted twice a week and he was at the forefront of ministry. He was tithing. And the tax collector wasn't lying either. He was a sinner. He lived sinfully. But the attitude, he came with the right attitude. He came with the attitude of surrender. He surrendered to God and said, I cannot do this on my own. I am a sinner. I need you. The Pharisee came towards God as, okay, God, I deserve to be here because I have done all this. So as a result, what happened? Who left justified? Justified by faith alone. Dear brothers and sisters, I want to make this very clear to you that the leaven in your life is legalism. Sin is bad. Sin is stupid. Please don't get into sin. That's a separate thing. But if one thing which God hates more than sin is leaven, because it is legalism, it is pride. What kept Satan out of heaven? It was pride. But you need to humble yourself and say, it is not because of my righteousness. It is not because I've been perfect, but it is because of a God who I serve. It is because of Jesus Christ and his righteousness and my faith in him, and by grace that he provided for me, his righteousness. I am just by faith in Christ Jesus. So let's put out all the leaven from our life and completely rely on God alone. May God bless you.